The regulars at Platinum Edge Hair Studio thought they knew everything about Madison Hayes. They saw her gentle hands working through their hair with practiced precision, watched her create perfect layers and flawless color corrections, and assumed that was the extent of her talents. Her soft-spoken demeanor and careful attention to detail seemed to fit perfectly with their image of the suburban hairstylist who lived for the latest trends and celebrity gossip. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. None of them suspected that those same steady hands had once held a different kind of tool entirely. None of them knew that the woman who could transform their appearance with scissors and color had once been trained to end lives. From distances that would make most people dizzy just thinking about them, Madison pulled into the gravel parking lot of Rocky Mountain Precision Range at exactly 6:30 a.m., her silver Honda Civic looking distinctly out of place among the lifted trucks and tactical vehicles that dominated the lot. The morning air carried the crisp bite of Colorado mountain weather, and she could see her breath as she stepped out of the car. In the distance, the peaks of the Front Range caught the first rays of sunlight, painting them in shades of gold and pink that reminded her of some of the more adventurous color techniques she'd mastered over the years. She moved to her trunk with the same methodical precision she brought to sectioning hair, retrieving a worn black rifle case that looked like it had seen better days. The leather was scuffed in places, and the brass corners showed the patina of age and use. It was the kind of case that spoke of function over form, utility over style, completely at odds with the image she'd cultivated in her civilian life. The shooting range stretched before her like an amphitheater carved into the mountainside, with covered firing positions stepping down toward distant targets that seemed impossibly small from her vantage point. At this early hour, only the most dedicated shooters were present, their expensive equipment glinting in the morning light as they went through their setup routines. Madison had chosen this time deliberately. Fewer crowds meant less scrutiny, less chance of running into the kind of weekend warriors who treated shooting sports like a social club, where membership was determined by the cost of your gear rather than the quality of your skills. She needed space to think, to remember, to see if the abilities that had once defined her were still accessible after 5 years of cutting hair and mixing highlights. The transformation from Sergeant Madison Hayes, Army sniper, to Madison the hairstylist hadn't happened overnight. It had taken months of deliberate effort to soften the edges that military life had sharpened, to learn to move through the world without constantly scanning for threats, to find purpose in creating beauty rather than dealing in the harsh necessities of warfare. Hairstyling had been her therapist's suggestion, actually. Something creative that required the same steady hands and attention to detail that had made her exceptional with a rifle, but channeled toward helping people feel better about themselves rather than the darker applications of her skill set. The transition had been surprisingly natural. The precision required for a perfect layered cut wasn't so different from the precision needed to place a bullet exactly where it needed to go, just with significantly more pleasant consequences. Her clients at Platinum Edge knew her as the stylist who never seemed rattled, who could fix even the most disastrous home color jobs, who listened without judgment and worked magic with seemingly impossible requests. Mrs. Patterson trusted her with quarterly touch-ups that kept her looking 20 years younger. Jennifer Morrison brought her teenage daughters for their first professional cuts, knowing Madison would make them feel beautiful without going too dramatic. Robert Chun relied on her for the kind of executive haircut that projected authority. In boardroom meetings they saw competence, creativity, and calm professionalism. What they didn't see was the hypervigilance that never fully switched off, the way she positioned herself to maintain sight lines to all exits, the manner in which she unconsciously cataloged every person who entered her sphere of awareness. These were habits ingrained by years of training and deployment, softened by civilian life, but never entirely erased. Madison had built a good life in Colorado Springs. Her studio was successful, her clients were loyal, and she'd found genuine satisfaction in the daily routine of helping people look and feel their best. But lately, something has been stirring beneath the surface. A restlessness that she couldn't quite shake. A sense that she'd packed away a part of herself so completely that she was beginning to forget it had ever existed. The catalyst had been a news report 3 weeks earlier about a shooting competition in Wyoming. She'd been closing up the studio, half listening to the television in the background while she cleaned her tools and prepared the workspace for the next day. But when the footage showed precision shooters engaging targets at extreme distances, something had shifted inside her. Her hands had stilled on the brush she was cleaning, her full attention drawn to the screen in a way that felt almost involuntary. The competitors moved with a confidence and purpose that stirred memories she'd thought were safely buried. Their methodical approach to each shot, the way they read wind conditions and adjusted for environmental factors, the satisfaction evident in their faces when they achieved the precision they were seeking, it all felt familiar in a way that both thrilled and unsettled her. That night, for the first time in years, she'd pulled out the locked case from her bedroom closet. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth like a sleeping secret, was her rifle. Not a military issue, but a precision instrument she'd purchased during her final months of service when competitive shooting had seemed like a natural transition from her military career. It was a Remington 700 in .308 Winchester, customized, with a barrel that had cost her 3 months of military pay and fitted with a scope that represented the very best optics technology available to civilian shooters. Unlike the tactical black rifles that dominated most shooting ranges, this one retained a classic aesthetic with its walnut stock and blued steel finish. It looked like a hunting rifle, understated and traditional, which had been exactly her intention when she'd chosen it. Madison ran her fingers along the familiar contours of the stock, feeling the weight as she lifted it from the case. Muscle memory kicked in automatically as she performed a function check, her movements smooth and practiced despite 5 years of disuse. The rifle was exactly as she'd left it, meticulously maintained even in storage, ready to perform with the same reliability that had never failed her when performance mattered most. From a separate compartment in the case, she retrieved her ammunition. Match-grade cartridges she'd hand-loaded herself during those final months of service, each one crafted with the obsessive attention to detail that separated recreational shooters from true marksmen. These weren't the kind of rounds you could buy off the shelf at any sporting goods store. They were precision instruments in their own right, designed for the kind of accuracy work that most civilian shooters never attempted. Now, standing in the parking lot of Rocky Mountain Precision Range with her gear in hand and the Colorado sunrise painting the world in shades of possibility, Madison felt the familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with anxiety that always preceded a test of skills that mattered. She wasn't sure what she hoped to accomplish today. Maybe just proof that those abilities were still there, locked away, but not lost. Maybe a chance to remember a version of herself that had been defined by competence and confidence rather than the careful anonymity she'd cultivated in civilian life. What she definitely wasn't expecting was to encounter the kind of assumptions and attitudes that had followed her throughout her military career, magnified by the casual arrogance that seemed to flourish in civilian shooting sports. But then again, Madison Hayes had spent her entire adult life being underestimated by people who thought they knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of based on nothing more than their own limited understanding of the world. The difference was that this time, she was choosing to do something about it. Madison's morning routine at Platinum Edge had been the same for 3 years, a carefully constructed rhythm that provided structure and purpose to her post-military life. She would arrive at 7 a.m. sharp, an hour before her first appointment, using the quiet time to prepare both her workspace and her mindset for the day ahead. The studio occupied the corner unit of an upscale strip mall in the Broadmoor area of Colorado Springs, with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the morning light and gave her clients spectacular views of Cheyenne Mountain while she worked. The space itself was Madison's pride and joy, designed with the same attention to detail she'd once applied to mission planning. Clean lines, neutral colors, and high-end equipment created an atmosphere of professional competence, while carefully chosen artwork and comfortable seating areas made clients feel welcomed rather than intimidated. Every tool had its designated place, every product was arranged with military precision, and every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that spoke to standards most people never thought to maintain. She moved through her opening routine with practiced efficiency, checking each station, ensuring her tools were sterilized and sharp, mixing color formulas according to her carefully maintained notes on each client's preferences and hair history. This methodical approach had earned her a reputation as the most reliable stylist in the city. Clients knew that appointments with Madison started on time, proceeded according to plan, and delivered results that consistently exceeded expectations. Elena Rodriguez would be her first client of the day, a local news anchor who trusted Madison. With the kind of precision cut and color that had to look perfect under studio lights. Elena had been coming to her for 2 years, ever since Madison had rescued her from a catastrophic highlighting disaster at a chain salon. The repair work had taken 6 hours and established Madison's reputation for being able to fix anything, no matter how badly damaged. "Madison, you're a miracle worker," Elena always said, settling into the styling chair with the confidence of someone who knew she was in capable hands. "I don't know how you do it, but you always know exactly what I need before I even know it." Myself, the comment wasn't far from the truth. Madison had developed an ability to read people that went far beyond hair and makeup. Years of training and observation and assessment had made her exceptionally skilled at understanding what clients really wanted, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. She could see past the celebrity photos they brought in to understand what would actually work with their face shape, lifestyle, and maintenance preferences. "It's about listening," Madison would explain when pressed about her methods. "Really listening to what people tell you, both with their words and without them. Hair is personal. It's how people present themselves to the world. My job is to help them feel like the best version of themselves." What she didn't mention was that the same skills that made her exceptional at reading clients had once been applied to reading terrain, weather conditions, and target movements at distances measured in hundreds of yards. The ability to process multiple variables simultaneously, to notice the subtle details that others missed, to maintain focus under pressure. These weren't skills that disappeared just because you changed careers. By 9 a.m., the studio was humming with activity. Madison's assistant, Carmen, had arrived to handle walk-ins and manage the appointment schedule, while the other stylists in the shared space began their own days. The atmosphere was collegial but professional, with each stylist maintaining their own client base while sharing the overhead costs of the premium location. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Madison, Mrs. Chun called," Carmen announced, checking the appointment book. "She wants to move her Thursday appointment up to tomorrow if possible. Something about a last-minute board meeting." Madison consulted her mental schedule, cross-referencing Mrs. Chun's color timing with the chemical processes required for her other appointments. "Put her at 2 p.m. tomorrow," she decided. "That gives us enough time for a full color refresh if she needs it, and it won't conflict with the Henderson's anniversary appointment." This kind of scheduling juggling was second nature to her now, another application of the strategic thinking that had once been focused on mission planning and tactical operations. Every appointment was a small logistical puzzle, requiring coordination of timing, materials, and client needs. The skills transferred more easily than most people would expect. Thomas Weber arrived precisely at 9:30 for his monthly executive cut, briefcase in hand and phone already buzzing with what Madison knew would be a steady stream of business calls throughout their session. Thomas was a partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, and his haircut was as much a business tool as his expensive suits and Italian leather shoes. The usual? Madison asked, though she already knew the answer. Thomas had been getting exactly the same cut for the 18 months he'd been her client, with only minor seasonal adjustments for length. Actually, Thomas said, surprising her, I'm thinking about something a little different, maybe a bit more contemporary. My daughter says I look too much like her grandfather. Madison studied his face in the mirror, considering options that would update his look without compromising the authority he needed to project in court. This was the kind of challenge she enjoyed most, taking someone slightly outside their comfort zone while ensuring they still felt confident and authentic. I'm thinking we take about half an inch off the sides, she suggested, running her fingers through his hair to demonstrate. Clean up the neckline, but keep enough length on top that you can still style it conservatively when needed. Very subtle change, but it'll make you look 10 years younger. As she worked, Thomas relaxed in the way that most of her clients did. The combination of skilled hands and genuine attention, creating a space where people felt comfortable sharing things they might not discuss elsewhere. Madison had learned that hair salons were confessionals of a sort, places where the intimacy of personal grooming created opportunities for real conversation. My partner thinks I should retire, Thomas mentioned casually as Madison began cutting. Says I've made enough money, won enough cases, proved enough points. Maybe it's time to focus on other things. What do you think? Madison asked, continuing her work with steady, precise movements. I think he might be right, Thomas admitted. But I'm not sure what other things means for someone like me. Law has been my entire adult life. I'm not sure who I am without. If Madison understood the sentiment more deeply than Thomas could possibly know. The question of identity after leaving a defining career was one she'd wrestled with extensively during her own transition. Maybe it's not about who you are without it, she suggested. Maybe it's about who you are because of it, and how those skills and experiences can serve you in whatever comes next. The conversation continued as she refined his cut, each snip of the scissors removing hair and revealing a slightly updated version of the man he'd always been. By the time she finished styling, Thomas looked refreshed and contemporary without appearing to have tried too hard. The change was subtle but transformative, exactly what he'd needed, even if he hadn't been able to articulate it initially. Perfect, he said, studying his reflection from multiple angles. How do you always know exactly what will work? Practice, Madison replied, though the answer was more complex than that single word could convey. And paying attention to what people really need, not just what they think they want. The morning continued with a steady stream of appointments, each presenting its own unique challenges and opportunities. Sarah Martinez needed a color correction that would take her from an unfortunate box dye disaster back to her natural brunette. The process would require multiple steps and careful chemistry, but Madison had performed similar miracles dozens of times. I tried to do it myself, Sarah confessed, her embarrassment evident. I thought it would be simple. Brown dye over blonde. Highlights, how hard could it be? The result had been a patchy, uneven mess that ranged from orange to green depending on the lighting. Madison examined the damage with the same systematic approach she'd once applied to equipment failures in the field. Identify the problem, assess the resources available, develop a solution that addresses both immediate needs and long-term objectives. We can fix this, Madison assured her, beginning the complex process of color removal and replacement. It's going to take some time, but we'll get you back to where you want to be. As she worked, mixing formulas and timing applications with precise attention to detail, Madison found herself thinking about the conversation with Thomas. The question of identity and purpose was one that had occupied her thoughts frequently. Since leaving the military, the transition from soldier to civilian, from someone whose skills were literally matters of life and death, to someone whose expertise was focused on appearance and confidence, had required significant mental adjustment. But gradually, she'd come to understand that the core of what made her effective hadn't changed. The same attention to detail that had made her an exceptional sniper made her an exceptional stylist. The same ability to remain calm under pressure that had served her in combat served her when dealing with hair emergencies and demanding clients. The same strategic thinking that had kept her alive in hostile environments helped her build a successful business and navigate the complexities of civilian life. What she'd lost in leaving the military was the sense of mission, the feeling that her skills were being applied to something larger than herself. Hairstyling was rewarding work, and she genuinely enjoyed helping people feel confident and beautiful, but it lacked the intensity and purpose that had defined her previous career. That restlessness had been building for months, a growing sense that she was operating at perhaps 30% of her actual capabilities. Like a race car being driven in the school zone, technically performing its function but nowhere near its potential. The shooting range represented a chance to reconnect with that other part of herself, to see if those skills were still sharp, and if they still brought the same sense of focused purpose they once had. By lunchtime, Madison had completed 4 appointments, each requiring different techniques and approaches, but all benefiting from the same fundamental principles: precision, attention to detail, and genuine care for the outcome. She used her break to review the afternoon schedule and prepare for her more complex appointments, including a full color transformation for a client preparing for her wedding. The wedding appointment was always among her favorites, carrying the kind of emotional weight that made the technical challenges more meaningful. Brides trusted her with their vision for one of the most important days of their lives, requiring not just technical skill, but emotional intelligence and the ability to remain calm when stress levels ran high. Jessica Patterson would arrive at 2 p.m. for a color consultation that had been months in the planning. They discussed multiple options, conducted strand tests, and carefully coordinated with the wedding photographer to ensure the final result would look perfect both in person and in the professional photos that would preserve the day for decades. "I want to look like myself," Jessica had explained during their initial consultation. "Just the very best version of myself. Classic, elegant, timeless. Something I'll still love when I look at the photos 20 years from now." It was exactly the kind of challenge Madison appreciated most, taking someone's natural beauty and enhancing it without overpowering it, creating a look that felt both special and authentic. The technical requirements were complex, involving multiple color processes and precise timing, but the emotional requirements were just as important. As she prepared the color formulas for Jessica's appointment, Madison reflected on how much her life had changed since leaving the military. The skills were different, the stakes were different, but the fundamental satisfaction of performing complex tasks with excellence remained constant. Whether she was engaging a target at extreme distance or creating the perfect bridal look, the core requirements were the same: preparation, precision, and the ability to perform under pressure. The question that had been nagging at her for weeks was whether she could find a way to honor both sides of her experience. Could she maintain the life she'd built as Madison, the hairstylist, while also reconnecting with the skills and intensity that had defined Sergeant Madison Hayes? The shooting range might provide some answers, or it might simply confirm that some chapters of life were meant to remain closed. The main building at Rocky Mountain Precision Range was an impressive structure that commanded respect from the moment you approached it. Built from local stone and heavy timber, it resembled a high-end hunting lodge more than a typical shooting facility. The architect had clearly understood that serious precision shooters expected their venues to reflect the importance they placed on their sport. Large windows offered panoramic views of the shooting positions that cascaded down the hillside in carefully engineered terraces, each designed to provide optimal angles for long-range engagement. Madison pushed through the heavy oak doors and immediately felt the weight of being evaluated. The interior continued the upscale lodge theme with polished concrete floors, exposed wooden beams, and display cases filled with precision rifles that represented serious financial investment. The walls showcased photographs of competition winners and record-setting groups, almost exclusively featuring men holding trophies and wearing sponsor patches that indicated professional level involvement in competitive shooting. Behind the registration counter sat a woman in her 40s, with short-cropped auburn hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested extensive experience dealing with the egos that often accompanied expensive hobbies. Her name tag read Linda Chambers, and her polo shirt bore the Rocky Mountain Precision logo, along with patches indicating various instructor certifications. "Good morning," Linda said, her tone professional but carrying the subtle assessment that Madison had grown accustomed to in male-dominated environments. "Are you here to meet someone, or did you need information about our beginner programs?" The fade assumption stung, though Madison kept her expression neutral. She'd encountered this dynamic countless times during her military career. The automatic presumption that a woman in a tactical environment must be either lost, accompanying someone else, or in need of basic instruction. "I'd like a day pass for the long-range facilities," she replied calmly. Linda's eyebrows rose slightly as she gestured toward a laminated price sheet. "Our precision rifle ranges start at $175 for a day pass, and they require demonstrated proficiency with firearms. We have shorter distance ranges that might be more appropriate if you're new to shooting sports." Madison pulled out her credit card with deliberate calm. "The long-range facilities will be fine. I'm familiar with firearms." "Of course, Linda." Sud, though her tone suggested polite skepticism. "I'll need to see shooting credentials or have you complete a safety evaluation before approving access to the precision ranges. We've had too many incidents with shooters who overestimated their abilities." During her military service, Madison's credentials had been unquestionable. The idea of having to prove basic competence felt alien, though she understood the liability concerns that drove such policies. "What kind of credentials do you accept?" "Military service records, NRA instructor certification, documentation of competition experience, or completion of our basic marksmanship course," Linda recited from obvious practice. "Alternatively, one of our range safety officers can observe you shooting at 200 yards and approve you for longer distances." Madison hesitated. Her military records would certainly qualify her, but revealing her service would open conversations she wasn't prepared to have. The specifics of her military occupational specialty inevitably led to questions about deployments, combat experience, and aspects of her past that she preferred to keep private in civilian settings. "I'll take the evaluation," she decided, signing the liability waiver Linda slid across the counter. "Excellent choice," Linda said, warming slightly now that administrative hurdles were being cleared. "That'll be $175 for the day pass plus $50 for the safety evaluation. Marcus will be your evaluator. He's one of our senior range officers and a former police sniper. Very knowledgeable about precision shooting." As Madison handed over her credit card, she noticed Linda's eyes drift to her rifle case. The worn leather and understated design clearly didn't match the tactical aesthetic that dominated the range, and she could see questions forming behind the woman's professional smile. "That's an interesting case," Linda commented as she processed. "The payment, classic style. Don't see many like that anymore." "It belonged to my grandfather," Madison replied, accepting her receipt and the temporary ID badge that would allow her range access. The lie came easily, a simple story that would discourage further questions while explaining the case's aged appearance. Linda handed her a facility map, highlighting key locations with a yellow marker. The 200-yard evaluation range is here, where Marcus will assess your shooting. If you qualify, and I'm sure you will, the precision ranges extend out to 1,200 yards in 100-yard increments. We've got steel targets at all distances, plus paper targets for group shooting. What's the most popular distance among your precision shooters? Madison asked, genuinely curious about the civilian shooting culture she'd been away from for years. Most serious shooters spend their time between 400 and 800 yards, Linda explained. That's where you get real ballistic challenges without the extreme environmental factors that come into play at the longer ranges. Our 600-yard line tends to attract the most dedicated marksmen. That's where you really separate the recreational shooters from the people who understand what precision shooting is about. Madison nodded, filing away the information. 600 yards was a distance she'd engaged routinely during her military service, though usually under conditions that made civilian target shooting seem almost relaxing by comparison. Marcus should finish his current evaluation in about 20 minutes, Linda continued. You're welcome to observe the facility while you wait. Just remember that all ranges are active, so stay behind the designated safety lines. Understood, Madison said. Shouldering her gear and heading toward the observation areas, the facility was busier than she'd expected for a weekday morning. Serious-looking shooters occupied most of the precision positions, their expensive equipment, and methodical approaches indicating significant dedication to the sport. The sound of rifle fire created a steady backdrop of sharp cracks echoing off the mountain backdrop, a sound that stirred something deep in her memory. She found a bench near the 200-yard evaluation area and settled in to wait for Marcus, using the time to observe the other shooters and get a feel for the range culture. What she saw was impressive from a technical standpoint: high-end rifles, premium optics, and shooting techniques that spoke to serious study of the craft. What she also noticed, however, was a culture that seemed to equate expensive equipment with competence, where conversations focused more on gear specifications than fundamental marksmanship principles. It was a dynamic she'd observed in many civilian contexts: the tendency to substitute equipment for expertise, to assume that buying the right tools would automatically confer the skills to use them effectively. At the 600-yard line, she could see a group of 4 men engaged in what appeared to be a formal shooting session. Their equipment was state-of-the-art, their setup meticulous, and their confidence evident even from her distant vantage point. They moved with the casual authority of people who considered themselves experts, discussing technical details in voices that carried clearly across the range. Winds picking up from the northwest, one of them called out, consulting a handheld weather station that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Better adjust your dope accordingly. Already on it, another replied, making notes. In what appeared to be a custom ballistic logbook, this new scope tracks perfectly. Should be able to maintain precision even with the variable conditions. Madison watched their shooting routine with professional interest. Their technique was good, not military grade, but solid for civilian marksmen. What struck her most, however, was their obvious assumption that they represented the pinnacle of precision shooting at the facility. They carried themselves with the confidence of people who had never encountered anyone significantly better than they were. She also noticed that every other shooter at the range seemed to defer to their opinions and expertise. When they offered advice to adjacent shooters, it was received with gratitude. When they discussed equipment or technique, others listened with obvious respect. They had established themselves as the range's informal hierarchy, the group that newcomers would naturally look to for guidance and approval. Marcus Chen appeared at her shoulder exactly 20 minutes later, a compact man in his early 50s, with graying temples and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades outdoors. He moved with the deliberate precision of someone accustomed to being watched and evaluated, and his polo shirt bore patches indicating his credentials as both a range safety officer and certified instructor. "Ms. Hayes?" he asked, extending a calloused hand. "I'm Marcus. Linda mentioned you're looking to qualify for our precision ranges." His handshake was firm, but not aggressive, and his eyes held the kind of professional assessment that Madison recognized from her military days, someone sizing up capabilities without making assumptions. It was refreshing after the morning's subtle dismissals. "That's right," Madison replied, shouldering her rifle case. "I understand you need to observe me shooting. At 200 yards first." "Standard procedure," Marcus explained as they walked toward the evaluation area. "We've had too many incidents with shooters who overestimated their abilities or weren't familiar with our safety protocols. Nothing personal, just good business. Practice." He paused, glancing at her gear with curiosity rather than judgment. "What are you shooting today?" "Remington 700 in .308, Madison answered. "Custom barrel, hand-loaded ammunition." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, the first indication that her equipment choices had surprised someone at the range in a positive way. "Handloads, impressive. That's real dedication to the craft. Most folks stick with factory ammunition these days." "I like knowing exactly what my rifle is doing," Madison said simply, a statement that could be interpreted as either thoroughness or obsessiveness depending on one's perspective. They reached the 200-yard evaluation station just as the group from the 600-yard line was finishing their session and moving toward the parking area. Madison caught fragments of their conversation as they passed. The easy confidence of people discussing a successful morning of shooting. "That last string was money," one of them was saying to a tall man with perfectly styled hair and wraparound sunglasses. "What was your group size, Derek?" Derek Mansfield straightened up from where he'd been packing his custom rifle into a case. "That probably cost more than most people's cars." His shooting jacket was covered in sponsor patches from various firearms manufacturers, and his gear had the pristine condition that suggested more investment than actual field use. .7 MOA, Derek replied with casual pride. "Not bad for the conditions, but I'll do better with my new handloads next week." The group began moving toward the parking area, but Derek's attention was caught by the sight of Madison unpacking her rifle at the evaluation station. His gaze lingered on her simple attire and worn equipment with undisguised amusement. "Well, well," Derek said, loud enough to be clearly overheard. "Looks like we've got some new talent joining us today." His companions turned to look, and Madison felt the familiar weight of being evaluated and found wanting. The men formed a loose semicircle, ostensibly organizing their own gear, but clearly focused on watching her setup process. Richard Garrett, a silver-haired man in his 60s with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, was the first to approach. Unlike Derek's obvious condescension, Richard's manner seemed genuinely helpful, though tinged with the same underlying assumptions about her capabilities. "First time at Rocky Mountain?" Richard asked, his tone friendly but patronizing. "It can be a bit overwhelming for newcomers. We've got quite a serious crowd here." "I can see that," Madison replied diplomatically, continuing to assemble her rifle with the methodical precision that had become second nature. Kevin Morrison, a younger man with a meticulously groomed beard and tactical clothing that looked like it had never seen actual tactical use, joined the growing audience. "That's a beautiful classic rifle," he said, though his tone suggested he found it more curious than impressive. "Don't see many of those traditional setups anymore. Most people have moved on to more modern platforms." Madison finished mounting her scope and began her pre-shooting checks, aware that every movement was being scrutinized by men who clearly considered themselves the range's resident experts. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years being evaluated by instructors and peers who actually were experts, where the standards were measured in mission success rather than weekend bragging rights. "What distance are you planning to work up to?" Derek asked, his question carrying the subtle challenge of someone probing for limitations. The longer ranges here can be pretty demanding, especially for someone just getting started with precision shooting. I'll see how the evaluation goes, Madison answered neutrally, though she could feel Marcus watching the interaction with growing interest. Smart approach, Richard nodded approvingly. Too many people try to run before they can walk. The fundamentals matter more than anything else, especially with equipment that isn't designed for extreme precision work. The comment about her equipment stung, particularly since Madison knew her rifle was capable of accuracy that would shame most of the custom guns on the range. The difference was that her setup prioritized function over appearance, reliability over flash, principles that had served her well in environments where equipment failure meant more than just a disappointing day at the range. Derek stepped closer, studying her rifle with the exaggerated interest of someone making a point. "Is that the original action?" he asked. "Because the tolerances on those older platforms can be pretty inconsistent. You might want to consider upgrading to something more modern if you're serious about precision work." "The action's been blueprinted," Madison said simply, not elaborating on the fact that the work had been done by one of the country's premier gunsmiths and had cost her 4 months of military pay. Good, Derek said, though his tone suggested he remained skeptical. "Still, there's only so much you can do with that platform. At some point, you have to accept the limitations of older technology." Kevin nodded sagely, as if Derek had imparted profound wisdom. "It's like trying to race a classic car against modern Formula One machines. Sure, it's got character, but performance is performance." Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing discomfort, clearly recognizing the condescending nature of the comments, even if he wasn't sure how to intervene diplomatically. "Gentlemen," he suggested, "maybe we should let Ms. Hayes focus on her evaluation." Of course, Richard said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "We don't want to interfere with the learning process. It's always exciting to see someone taking their first steps into serious precision shooting." As the group began to disperse toward their own vehicles, Derek lingered for a moment longer. "Hey, no pressure," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But if you need any guidance after your evaluation, feel free to ask. We've all been where you are now." The casual assumption that she was at the beginning of a journey he had long since mastered was perhaps the most galling comment yet. Madison met his gaze steadily, her voice remaining calm despite the irritation building inside her. "I appreciate the offer," she said. "I'll keep it in mind." As Derek finally walked away to join his companions, Marcus shook his head slightly. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "They mean well, mostly, but they can be a bit intense about their hobby." Madison nodded, though she wondered if Marcus truly understood the depth of condescension she'd just encountered. What she'd experienced wasn't enthusiasm for the sport. It was the casual dismissal of someone deemed unworthy of serious consideration, wrapped in the veneer of helpful advice. But as she settled into her shooting position and began her focusing routine, Madison felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. The cold, controlled determination that had once made her one of the deadliest soldiers in her unit. These men had no idea who they were talking to, and part of her was very much looking forward to their education. The 200-yard evaluation should have been routine, but Madison realized it had become something more significant. It wasn't just about qualifying for the longer ranges anymore. It was about whether she was ready to reclaim a part of herself she'd thought was permanently retired. The 200-yard evaluation range occupied a natural depression in the hillside, with concrete shooting benches positioned to take advantage of the terrain's natural wind protection. Marcus positioned himself slightly behind and to the right of Madison's shooting position, clipboard in hand, ready to observe her handling of the rifle and basic marksmanship skills. The target downrange was a standard bullseye with scoring rings, child's play for someone with Madison's background, though she was careful not to let overconfidence affect her fundamentals. "Whenever you're ready," Marcus said quietly. "5 rounds, take your time. Show me you can handle the rifle safely and put rounds where you're aiming." Madison nodded, settling into her prone position behind the rifle. The familiar weight of the stock against her shoulder brought an immediate sense of calm, muscle memory overriding the nervous energy that had been building since her arrival. Her breathing automatically shifted to the controlled rhythm she'd learned years ago. Inhale, exhale halfway, hold squeezed out. What should have been a moment of focused concentration was interrupted by Derek's voice carrying clearly from the parking area where his group had apparently paused their departure to watch the evaluation. "Marcus, you might want to keep an eye on her form," Derek called out, not bothering to lower his voice despite being barely 50 feet away. "I noticed some technique issues during her setup." Madison's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her position, trying to block out the commentary. Through her scope, the bullseye was perfectly clear at 200 yards, close enough that she could probably achieve acceptable accuracy with iron sights. She began her trigger squeeze, smooth and steady pressure building toward the break point. "See how she's gripping the rifle." Derek continued his impromptu instruction session for his companions. "Way too aggressive. She's going to pull her shots all over the place with that kind of tension." The rifle fired, the familiar crack echoing across the range. Through the scope, Madison could see a clean hole in the X-ring, dead center of the bullseye. She worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent casing and chambering the next round. Her movements efficient and practiced. "Lucky shot." Kevin's voice joined the commentary. "Bet she can't repeat it with that grip." Marcus raised his binoculars to check the target, and Madison caught the slight widening of his eyes as he confirmed the shot placement. "Nice shooting," he said quietly, though his voice carried enough for Derek's group to hear. "Must be ideal conditions today," Richard observed from his position near their vehicles. "Sometimes the environment helps compensate for technique issues." The casual dismissal of her skill as environmental luck was perhaps more insulting than outright mockery would have been. Madison chambered her second round, her breathing steady despite the growing irritation. The second shot broke cleanly, another hole appearing in the X-ring barely half an inch from the first. "Okay, that's definitely luck," Derek said, his voice carrying a note of forced joviality. "Nobody shoots that consistently with their first magazine through an unfamiliar range." Madison fired her third shot, then her fourth, each one finding the center of the target with mechanical precision. By the time she fired her fifth and final round, she had created a group that could be covered by a quarter, shooting that would be considered excellent by any standard, let alone for an evaluation. Marcus lowered his binoculars, clearly impressed despite himself. "That's outstanding marksmanship," he said, making notes on his clipboard. "You're definitely cleared for the precision ranges. Any particular distance you want to start with?" Before Madison could answer, Derek appeared at her shoulder, having walked over to get a closer look at her target through his own high-end spotting scope. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, though his tone suggested he was more puzzled than impressed. "That's actually pretty decent for a beginner. What did you say your background was?" "I didn't," Madison replied, beginning to pack up her gear for the move to longer ranges. "Come on, don't be modest," Kevin joined them, his own spotting scope trained on her target. "That kind of grouping doesn't happen by accident. You must have some experience. Hunter, maybe? Your boyfriend teaches you to shoot?" The assumption that any skill she possessed must have been imparted by a man was a familiar frustration, one that Madison had encountered throughout her military career and apparently would continue to face in civilian contexts. She continued packing her equipment without responding, though Marcus noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. "Maybe she's just a natural," Richard suggested, though even his attempt at a compliment carried condescending undertones. "Some people have an instinctive feel for marksmanship." "Of course, instinct only gets you so far." Real precision shooting requires technical knowledge and experience that takes years to develop. Exactly, Derek agreed, warming to the theme. This 200-yard stuff is basically point-and-shoot territory. The real challenges start when you get out to 400, 500 yards. That's where you need to understand ballistics, environmental factors, all the technical aspects that separate recreational shooters from serious practitioners. Madison shouldered her rifle case, her movements deliberate and controlled. "What distances do you gentlemen typically shoot?" she asked, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "We spend most of our time between 600 and 1,000 yards, Derek replied, puffing up slightly at what he clearly interpreted as deference to his expertise. "That's where real precision work happens. Takes years to develop the skills for consistent accuracy at those ranges. Hundreds of hours of practice," Kevin added, "plus significant investment in the right equipment. You really can't achieve serious precision with entry-level gear." "The learning curve is pretty steep," Richard chimed in. "Most people get discouraged when they realize how much time and money it takes to compete at our level. Not everyone is cut out for it." Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing discomfort, recognizing the subtle but persistent message being delivered to Madison. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "would you like me to show you the 400-yard range? That might be a good next step." "Actually," Madison said, her voice calm but carrying a new edge, "I was thinking of starting at 600 yards. The statement hung in the air. For a moment, followed by barely suppressed chuckles from Derek's group. 600. Derek repeated, his eyebrows rising dramatically. "That's ambitious. Most people work up to that distance gradually, over months or even years of practice. The ballistic calculations alone are pretty complex," Kevin added helpfully. "Environmental factors become major considerations. It's not something you can just jump into without extensive preparation." "Plus," Richard said, his tone taking on the patient quality of someone explaining simple concepts to a child, "the targets at 600 yards are significantly smaller and more challenging. We're talking about precision requirements that your current equipment might not be capable of achieving." Madison met their gazes steadily, noting how they'd positioned themselves in a loose semicircle around her, unconsciously asserting their authority through body language. It was a dynamic she'd seen countless times in various contexts, men establishing dominance through subtle intimidation and condescension. "I appreciate your concern," she said finally, her voice carrying the kind of quiet confidence that should have been a warning to anyone paying attention. "But I think I'll give 600 yards a try." Derek exchanged glances with his companions, clearly debating whether to continue their helpful advice or let her learn through failure. The dynamic had shifted subtly. What had started as casual condescension was now becoming a more deliberate effort to maintain their position as the range's acknowledged experts. "Tell you what," Derek said finally, his tone taking on a magnanimous quality, "why don't you observe us for a while first? We're planning to do some precision work at 800 yards this afternoon. You could watch how it's done at that distance, get a feel for the technical requirements. Might save you some frustration and wasted ammunition." The offer was clearly intended to reinforce the hierarchy, position her as a student and them as teachers, establish their expertise while highlighting her presumed inexperience. It was the kind of power play that Madison had encountered numerous times during her military career, though usually in more overtly competitive contexts. "That's very generous," Madison replied. "But I prefer to learn by doing." The polite rejection seemed to surprise them, as if they couldn't quite believe someone would decline their offer of instruction. As they began walking toward the 600-yard range, Madison could hear their muttered comments trailing behind them. "This should be interesting," Derek said, not bothering to keep his voice down. "I give her 3 shots before she gives up," Kevin added. "Assuming she can even hit the backstop," Richard concluded with a chuckle. Word of the morning's events had apparently spread through the range's informal communication network, because Madison noticed other shooters beginning to gather near the 600-yard line. Some seemed genuinely curious about the newcomer who had impressed Marcus during her evaluation, while others appeared to be anticipating entertainment of a different sort. The 600-yard range was an impressive setup, with covered shooting positions built into the natural slope of the hillside to provide optimal angles toward the distant targets. Steel gongs of various sizes hung at measured distances, while paper targets on adjustable frames offered precise aiming points for those focused on group size rather than the satisfying ring of steel. Madison selected a shooting position near the center of the line, methodically setting up her equipment while Derek's group established themselves at adjacent positions. The ritual of preparation felt familiar, unfolding her shooting mat, setting up her spotting scope, arranging her ammunition in precise rows. Each movement was deliberate, economical, the product of years of training where efficiency could mean the difference between mission success and failure. "Interesting technique," Richard observed, watching her setup process through his expensive binoculars. "Very systematic, almost military-like in its precision." The comment was closer to the truth than he could possibly know, but Madison simply nodded acknowledgement while continuing her preparations. She pulled out her worn notebook, filled with ballistic data and environmental corrections accumulated over years of precision shooting. The pages were water-stained and dog-eared, a stark contrast to the pristine ballistic apps running on the smartphones that Derek's group consulted constantly. "Still using paper charts?" Kevin asked, gesturing at her notebook with barely concealed amusement. "There are apps that can calculate all that stuff automatically now. Much more accurate than handwritten notes." "Technology is wonderful," Derek agreed, holding up his phone with its ballistic calculator app. "Takes all the guesswork out of long-range shooting. Though I suppose if you're not familiar with modern tools." Madison continued her calculations, factoring in the morning temperature, humidity, and the slight crosswind that had picked up as the day progressed. Her notebook contained data specific to her rifle and ammunition combination, gathered through hundreds of hours of range time and real-world application. No app could replicate that level of personalized precision. "What's your target of choice out there?" Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice, as he set up his own spotting scope to observe her shooting. Madison studied the array of targets downrange. At 600 yards, the steel gongs ranged from dinner plate size down to a challenging 10-inch circle that would test even experienced shooters. The paper targets offered precise aiming points but lacked the immediate feedback of steel. "The 10-inch gong," she said simply. Derek's group exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her choice of the most challenging target available. "That's ambitious," Richard said diplomatically. "Most people start with the larger targets when they're learning long-range fundamentals. The 12-inch gong might be more realistic for your first attempt at this distance," Kevin suggested helpfully. "Even experienced shooters struggle with that 10-inch target on windy days." Derek had been watching this exchange with growing amusement, clearly seeing an opportunity to make his point about the gap between ambition and ability. "You know what?" he said, standing up from his own shooting position. "This could be educational for everyone involved. What did you have in mind?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Derek's smile was the kind of expression worn by someone who believed they held all the advantages. "A friendly demonstration. If our new friend here can hit that 10-inch gong on her first shot, I'll personally cover her range fees for the rest of the year." The offer hung in the air, clearly intended to be so generous that it highlighted the impossibility of success. An annual membership at Rocky Mountain Precision cost over $2,000, serious money that demonstrated Derek's confidence in Madison's inevitable failure. "And if I miss?" Madison asked, her voice steady despite the sudden attention from other shooters who had begun gathering to watch the impromptu challenge. "Nothing dramatic," Derek said with false magnanimity. Just acknowledge that maybe you're getting ahead of yourself, and let us show you the proper progression for building long-range skills. Richard nodded approvingly. That's very fair, Derek. Everyone benefits from proper instruction, and there's no shame in learning from more experienced shooters. Kevin pulled out his phone, clearly intending to record what he expected to be, and cooled a educational failure. This could be a great teaching moment about the importance of building skills progressively. Madison studied the men surrounding her, recognizing the familiar dynamic of a group that had convinced itself it was being helpful while actually engaged in subtle humiliation. The wager wasn't really about money, it was about putting her in her place, forcing her to acknowledge their superiority and accept their authority. One shot, she said finally, at the 10-inch gong. One shot, Derek confirmed, his confidence evident in his relaxed posture and easy smile. Though honestly, even giving you multiple attempts would be sporting. That's a challenging target for anyone, especially with that equipment. Kevin added, gesturing at her rifle. No offense, but precision at this distance really requires modern technology. Your setup is more suited to hunting applications. Marcus had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort, clearly recognizing the condescending nature of the challenge, even if he wasn't sure how to intervene appropriately. Maybe we should just let Ms. Hayes shoot without the pressure of a wager, he suggested diplomatically. No pressure at all, Derek replied quickly. Just a friendly bet between shooting enthusiasts. Besides, if she's as confident as she seems, this should be easy money for her. The crowd of spectators had grown larger, drawn by word of the challenge, and the promise of witnessing either an impressive shot or an educational failure. Madison could feel their expectations pressing against her like a physical weight, some clearly hoping to see her fail and restore the natural order, others genuinely curious to see if she could back up her quiet confidence. She settled behind her rifle, adjusting the bipod legs and checking her scope alignment. Through the glass, the 10-inch steel gong looked deceptively small at 600 yards, a dark circle against the tan backdrop of the hillside. For most recreational shooters, it would represent a significant challenge requiring multiple attempts and careful adjustment. Take your time, Richard called out helpfully. Remember, at this distance, everything matters. Breathing, trigger control, follow through, and don't forget to account for wind drift. The unsolicited advice continued as Madison went through her pre-shot routine, checking wind flags, confirming her scope settings, loading a single cartridge into the chamber. The familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder brought a sense of calm that contrasted sharply with the growing excitement of the spectators. Derek had positioned himself where he could watch both Madison and the target, his phone out too. Record what he clearly expected to be a humorous story to share later. Other shooters had begun gathering, drawn by the commotion and the promise of witnessing either an impressive shot or an educational failure. Remember, Kevin said, unable to resist one final piece of advice, squeeze the trigger straight back. Don't jerk it, and follow through. Keep your head down until the bullet hits. Madison's finger found the trigger, her breathing settling into the controlled rhythm that had become as natural as walking. Through her scope, the crosshairs settled on the center of the distant gong. Steady despite the slight crosswind that required a minor correction to the left, the range fell silent as she exhaled halfway and held her breath, the crosshairs motionless on target. In this moment, there was no Derek, no audience, no pressure, just her, the rifle, and a target that seemed almost insultingly close compared to the shots she'd taken in less forgiving circumstances. Time slowed as her finger began the final pressure that would break the shot, 600 yards. For a woman who had once eliminated threats at over 1,000 yards in combat conditions, this felt almost like cheating. The trigger broke clean, the rifle's report cracking across the Colorado morning with authority. The sound that followed was unmistakable, The clear, resonant ping of lid striking steel that every precision shooter lives to hear. At 600 yards, the sound took a moment to travel back to the firing line, but when it arrived, it cut through the mountain air like a bell announcing vindication. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the faint echo of the shot bouncing off the surrounding peaks and the whisper, weighing through the pine trees that dotted the mountainside. Madison worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent brass casing that tumbled to her shooting mat with a soft metallic clink. She engaged the safety and sat up from her shooting position with the same calm deliberation she'd shown throughout her preparation, as if hitting a 10-inch target at 600 yards was merely another task completed on a routine checklist. Derek stood, frozen, his phone still recording, his mouth slightly open as his brain struggled to process what had just happened. Through his spotting scope, Richard stared downrange with the expression of someone who had just witnessed something that violated the fundamental laws of physics as he understood them. "Dead center," Marcus announced, though his voice carried a note of wonder that suggested even he was surprised by the precision of the shot. "Perfect hit." The gathering crowd of spectators began to murmur among themselves, the sound building like distant thunder as word spread that someone had just achieved what most of them would consider a career highlight shot. Phones appeared as other shooters began capturing video of the aftermath. Though they'd missed the moment itself, Derek finally lowered his phone, staring at Madison with an expression that cycled rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been the first glimmer of respect. "That was—" he started, then stopped, apparently unable to find words adequate to the situation. "Lucky," Richard finished, though even he seemed to doubt his own assessment. "Had to be. Nobody makes that shot cold, first round, with unfamiliar conditions." Madison calmly began packing her equipment, her movements unhurried despite the intense scrutiny. "Luck," she agreed mildly, "is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." The quote hung in the mountain air like a challenge, carrying implications that Derek's group was only beginning to understand. Kevin lowered his own spotting scope, his face pale beneath his carefully groomed beard. "One shot doesn't prove anything," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Consistency is what matters in precision shooting. Anyone can get lucky once." Derek seemed to shake himself back to awareness, his natural competitiveness reasserting itself over his shock. "You know what? Kevin's right. One shot could be a fluke." He paused, his confidence rebuilding as he found his footing again. "How about we make this really interesting?" "Derek," Marcus warned, his tone suggesting he could see where this was heading and didn't like it. "No, hear me out," Derek continued, his swagger returning. "Best 2 out of 3 shots. Same target, same conditions. If she can do it again, hell, if she can do it twice more, then I'll not only cover her range fees for the year, I'll personally apologize to everyone here for underestimating her." "And if I can't?" Madison asked, though her tone suggested she was merely clarifying terms rather than expressing doubt. Derek's smile returned, broader than before. "Then you admit this was a lucky shot, and you let us teach you the proper fundamentals of long-range shooting, starting with appropriate equipment for precision work." The challenge was clearly intended to be irresistible. Either prove the shot wasn't luck by repeating it twice more, or accept that it was indeed a fluke and submit to their instruction. It was the kind of wager that seemed reasonable on the surface but was designed to put Madison in an impossible position. "That's very fair, Derek," Richard nodded approvingly. 2 more shots should definitely separate skill from chance. "Especially with that crosswind picking up," Kevin added, gesturing at the flags downrange that showed a slightly stronger breeze than when Madison had fired her first shot. The crowd of spectators had grown even larger, drawn by word of the challenge and the brewing confrontation. Madison could feel their expectations like a physical weight, some clearly hoping to see her fail and restore the natural order, others genuinely curious to see if she could repeat her performance. 2 more shots, she said finally, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet range. Derek's grin widened as he pulled out his phone again to ensure he captured whatever happened next. 2 more shots, he confirmed. Madison returned to her shooting position, checking her rifle and confirming that everything remained as she'd set it up. The gong downrange still swayed slightly from her first hit, a pendulum marking the precision that had stunned the watching shooters. Through her scope, she could see the impact point of her first shot, a bright mark on the dark steel exactly where she'd aimed. The wind had indeed picked up slightly, requiring a small adjustment to her point of aim, but nothing that would challenge someone with her experience reading environmental conditions. She loaded her second cartridge, the brass, sliding smoothly into the chamber with the satisfying click of precision machinery. Her breathing settled back into the controlled rhythm, her body automatically assuming the position that had become as natural as walking during her years of military service. "Remember," Richard called out, apparently unable to resist offering advice even now. "That wind is gusting. You'll need to time your shot between the stronger gusts." Madison ignored the commentary, focusing instead on the subtle movements of the wind flags at various distances downrange. The pattern was clear. To someone trained to read such signs, the gusts were consistent in their timing, predictable in their strength. She waited for the right moment, when the flag showed the brief lull that would give her the clearest path to target. The crosshairs settled on the gong, rock steady despite the distance and the pressure. Her finger found the trigger, applying pressure with the same smooth control that had served her through countless shots in far more challenging circumstances. The second shot broke cleanly, the rifle bucking against her shoulder with familiar authority. Again, the sound of the shot was followed by the unmistakable ring of steel, another direct hit on the same 10-inch target that Derek's group had considered an impossible challenge for someone of her supposed skill level. This time, the silence lasted longer. Kevin lowered his spotting scope with shaking hands, his face pale. Richard stood motionless, staring downrange as if the targets themselves had betrayed him. Derek's phone captured his own expression of dawning realization, the look of someone whose entire worldview was being systematically dismantled. 2 for 2, Marcus announced unnecessarily, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been pride. Madison chambered her third and final cartridge, her movements still calm and methodical despite the growing tension around her. Through her scope, she could see 2 bright impact marks on the steel gong, testament to precision that most of the watching shooters would struggle to achieve even with multiple attempts, and perfect conditions. The desert wind whispered across the range, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant sound of traffic on the highway below. But at the 600-yard line of Rocky Mountain Precision Range, the only sounds were the rustle of equipment and the barely audible breathing of spectators waiting to witness the conclusion of a demonstration that was rapidly becoming legendary. Madison's finger settled on the trigger for the third time, her breathing steady, her mind clear. 1 more shot, and Derek's education would be complete. The third shot broke with the same clean precision as the first 2, and the resulting ping of steel seemed to echo longer in the mountain air, as if the peaks themselves were acknowledging what had just transpired. 3 shots. 3 hits on a target that represented the upper limit of what most recreational precision shooters could achieve on their best days. Madison engaged the safety and sat up, her expression remaining calm despite having just delivered what amounted to a masterclass in long-range marksmanship. She began her post-shooting routine, checking the rifle, recording the environmental conditions in her worn notebook, cleaning the barrel with practiced efficiency. The silence stretched until Kevin finally broke it with a voice that came out as barely more than a whisper. 3 for 3 on the 10-inch gong at 600 yards. He stated each fact as if trying to convince himself. They were real. Richard had lowered his spotting scope and was staring at Madison with the expression of someone watching a magic trick and desperately trying to figure out how it was done. "That's not possible," he said, though his tone suggested he was arguing with reality itself rather than making an accusation. Derek stood frozen, his phone hanging loose in his grip, no longer recording because he'd forgotten it existed. His carefully constructed image as the range's alpha shooter was crumbling with each impossible shot, and he seemed unable to process the implications. "Who are you?" The question came from Marcus, voiced with genuine curiosity rather than challenge. "That level of precision, that's not recreational shooting. That's professional-grade marksmanship." Madison finished cleaning her barrel and looked up at the circle of stunned faces surrounding her. The moment of revelation had arrived, and she found herself oddly reluctant to shatter their worldview completely. These men, for all their condescension and assumptions, were enthusiasts who genuinely loved the sport of precision shooting. "Staff Sergeant Madison Hayes," she said quietly. "Army Sniper, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. 6 years of service, 3 combat deployments." The words hung in the mountain air like an explosion of understanding. Suddenly, everything made sense. The methodical preparation, the calm under pressure, the impossible precision that had seemed to violate the laws of physics. They hadn't been watching a hairstylist learning to shoot. They'd been watching a professional warrior demonstrating skills honed in the world's most unforgiving classroom. "Rangers," Richard breathed, and there was something approaching awe in his voice. "Jesus Christ, we were trying to teach marksmanship to a Ranger sniper." Kevin had gone pale, his phone forgotten in his trembling hands. How many confirmed kills? The question came out before he could stop himself. Then he immediately looked horrified at having asked it. Madison's expression darkened slightly. "That's not information I share," she said firmly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made it clear the topic was closed permanently. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out hoarse and uncertain. "Why didn't you say something when we were trying to?" His voice trailed off as the full magnitude of their presumption became clear. "Trying to teach me how to shoot?" Madison finished, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I was curious to see how far you'd take it." "But your equipment," Kevin protested weakly, grasping for some way to reconcile what he'd witnessed with his understanding of the world. "Your rifle, it's so basic. We thought." "You thought expensive gear makes a shooter," Madison said, beginning to pack her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd shown throughout the morning. "In combat, reliability matters more than brand names. This rifle has never failed me, never let me down when it mattered most. Can you say the same about your custom builds?" The question struck home because the answer was obvious to anyone who'd spent time on civilian ranges. Despite their expensive equipment and constant upgrades, none of them could have achieved what they'd just witnessed. Their custom rifles, premium optics, and tactical accessories were impressive tools, but they were instruments in the hands of hobbyists, not warriors. 6 years, Richard said, shaking his head in amazement. 3 combat deployments. How did you end up ... He gestured vaguely toward her civilian appearance, clearly struggling to reconcile the deadly professional with the woman, who looked like she'd just stepped out of a suburban salon. "I'm a hairstylist now," Madison said simply. "I own Platinum Edge Hair Studio in Colorado Springs. I cut hair, do color corrections, and help people feel confident about their appearance." The revelation hit them like a second shockwave. The deadly sniper was also the neighborhood hairstylist, the quiet woman who probably served coffee to their wives and children, who created beauty and confidence instead of dealing in the darker necessities of warfare. "A hairstylist," Derek repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "From Army Ranger sniper to hairstylist." "People change," Madison said, her voice carrying depths they were only beginning to understand. War changes people. Sometimes you need to find a different way to serve, a different way to make a positive impact on the world. Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand formally. Ma'am, it's been an honor watching you shoot today. And I owe you an apology for the way you were treated when you arrived. No apology necessary, Madison replied, shaking his hand. You were professional throughout. As for the rest, she looked at Derek, Kevin, and Richard, her expression neutral but not unkind. Sometimes assumptions are expensive lessons. Derek seemed to be struggling with something internal, his pride warring with the reality of what he'd witnessed. Finally, he stepped forward, his phone now put away, his demeanor completely transformed. I owe you more than an apology, he said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. I owe you respect and gratitude for your service. What you did, what you sacrificed. I had no right to treat you the way I did. None of us did, Richard added, his own shame evident. We saw what we expected to see instead of who you actually were. Kevin nodded mutely, still seeming stunned by the complete reversal of everything he'd thought he understood about the morning's events. Madison studied their faces, seeing genuine remorse alongside the lingering shock. These weren't bad men, just men who'd been confronted with their own limitations and prejudices in the most dramatic way possible. There's a lesson here, she said finally, for all of us. Don't judge people by their equipment, their appearance, or your assumptions about who they are or what they're capable of. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. As she began walking toward the parking area, Derek called after her. The membership. He said, I made a wager and I lost fair and square. Madison paused, turning back to face him. Keep your money, Derek. Spend it on something more valuable than range fees. What would you suggest? He asked, his earlier arrogance completely absent. Lessons, Madison said simply. Not in marksmanship. Spend it on learning to see people for who they really are instead of who you assume they are. The words carried across the range, leaving the men standing in contemplative silence. But as Madison reached her Honda, she heard Derek's voice again, no longer carrying the arrogant confidence that had marked his earlier interactions. Wait, he called, jogging to catch up with her. Please, we were wrong, completely, embarrassingly. Wrong, but would you consider? Could you maybe show us how you do it? Madison paused, her hand on her car door, studying Derek's face. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the condescending instructor, replaced by someone who genuinely recognized that he was in the presence of expertise far beyond his own. Show you what, exactly? She asked. Everything, Derek said simply. Your breathing technique, your approach to reading environmental conditions, how you achieve that level of consistency. I've been shooting competitively for 10 years, and I've never seen precision like that. Richard and Kevin had followed Derek, their own expressions carrying similar mixtures of curiosity and humility. Marcus brought up the rear, his professional interest evident in his focused attention. We understand if you'd rather not, Richard said quietly. After the way we treated you, you have every right to tell us to figure it out ourselves. Madison looked at the group of men, seeing something she hadn't expected, genuine desire to learn, stripped of the ego and assumptions that had defined their earlier interactions. It reminded her of young soldiers she'd trained, eager to absorb knowledge that might save their lives or the lives of their teammates. All right, she said finally, closing her car door. But we do this properly. No phones, no recording, no social media posts about secret sniper techniques. This is about fundamental marksmanship principles, nothing more. Absolutely, Derek agreed quickly, and the others nodded their understanding. They returned to the 600-yard line, where a small crowd of curious shooters had gathered around Madison's former shooting position, examining the setup that had produced such remarkable results. Word had spread quickly through the range about the hairstylist who'd put 3 consecutive shots on the challenging target, and speculation ran wild about her background. "First lesson," Madison said, setting down her rifle case and addressing the group that had formed around her. "Equipment doesn't make the shooter. I watched you gentlemen this morning, and you all have beautiful, expensive rifles. But you're relying on technology to compensate for fundamental weaknesses in technique." She pulled out her rifle, the worn finish and simple appearance now taking on an entirely different significance in the eyes of her impromptu students. "This is a tool," she continued. "A very good tool, but still just a tool. The precision you witness doesn't come from the rifle. It comes from understanding how to use it consistently, shot after shot, regardless of conditions." "But your scope," Kevin said, studying the optic mounted on her rifle. "It's not even a top-tier model. How do you achieve that precision with basic equipment?" Madison smiled, the expression warmer now that the defensive barriers had come down. "Because I know exactly how this scope tracks, how it responds to temperature changes, what its limitations are. I've fired thousands of rounds through this setup." "Can you say the same about your equipment?" The question hit home. Derek's group were equipment enthusiasts, constantly upgrading and modifying their rifles in pursuit of theoretical improvements, but rarely achieving the level of intimacy with their gear that came from extensive, consistent use. "Show us your shooting position," Richard requested. There was something different about how you set up, more systematic than what we typically see. Madison dropped into her prone position, demonstrating the body alignment that had been drilled into her through countless hours of training. "Bone support, not muscle support," she explained. "Your skeleton holds the rifle, your muscles just make fine adjustments. Most recreational shooters fight their rifles instead of working with them." She guided them through the fundamentals: proper cheek weld, consistent grip pressure, the importance of natural point of aim. These were concepts they'd heard before, but never explained with the precision and understanding that came from someone who'd applied them in life-or-death situations. "Breathing," she continued, settling behind her rifle again. "Not just holding your breath, but controlling your respiratory cycle to create the same physiological state for every shot. Your heart rate, your muscle tension, your mental focus, all of it needs to be identical, shot after shot." Derek attempted to mirror her position, and Madison made subtle corrections to his form. "Your grip is too aggressive," she noted. "The rifle should rest in your hands like a bird, firm enough that it won't fly away, gentle enough that you don't crush it." For the next hour, Madison worked with each of them individually, identifying the small technical flaws that were limiting their precision. With Kevin, it was trigger control. He was applying pressure at an angle rather than straight back. Richard's issue was follow-through. He was lifting his head to see the shot impact before the bullet had left the barrel. "Marcus," she called to the range officer, "would you mind setting up targets at 300 yards? Something they can actually hit consistently while we work on fundamentals." "Already on it," Marcus replied, raising fresh paper targets at the intermediate distance. As each man took turns applying Madison's instruction, the improvement was immediate and dramatic. Groups that had been scattered across several inches suddenly tightened to match quality precision. "It's like you flipped a switch," Kevin marveled, examining his latest group through the spotting scope. "Same rifle, same ammunition, but completely different results. Because you're finally using your equipment properly instead of expecting it to compensate for poor technique," Madison explained. "In the military, we had a saying, 'Master the fundamentals, and the difficult becomes simple.'" Derek fired a group that would have been respectable in formal competition, then looked up with something approaching wonder. "I've been shooting for 10 years, he said. "How did I not know this?" "Because you were focused on the wrong things," Madison replied honestly, but kindly. "Gear acquisition instead of skill development. Impressing others instead of challenging yourself. It's easy to get caught up in the accessories and lose sight of the actual craft. Richard nodded thoughtfully. We've been treating precision shooting like a hobby instead of a discipline. And there's nothing wrong with hobbies, Madison clarified. But if you want to achieve real precision, you have to approach it with the same seriousness you'd bring to any other skilled profession. Every shot matters. Every detail counts. There are no shortcuts. As the lesson concluded, the transformation in the group was remarkable. The arrogance had been replaced by genuine enthusiasm for learning. The dismissive attitudes had been replaced by respect for the process of skill development. This has been incredible, Derek said as they packed up their equipment. I feel like I've learned more in the past hour than in my last year of shooting. Good, Madison replied. But remember, what I've shown you today are fundamentals, not secrets. Everything I taught you is available in any quality marksmanship manual. The difference is discipline. Practice these techniques consistently, and you'll see continued improvement. Would you consider coming back? Richard asked hopefully. Maybe teaching a more formal class? Madison shouldered her rifle case, considering the question. I'll think about it, she said finally. But remember, the goal isn't to shoot like me. The goal is to become the best version of yourselves as marksmen. As she walked toward her car for the second time that day, Madison felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving her abilities. She'd taken 4 men who had dismissed her based on assumptions and turned them into genuine students of marksmanship. In its own way, it was as rewarding as any shot she'd ever made. The transformation was complete, not just in their shooting, but in their understanding of what it meant to truly excel at something. They'd learned that expertise often comes in unexpected packages, that assumptions can be dangerous, and that the most valuable lessons sometimes come from the people you least expect to teach them. The drive back to Colorado Springs gave Madison time to process the morning's events. The familiar landscape of the Front Range stretched before her, but something fundamental had shifted in how she saw both the world around her and herself within it. For 5 years, she'd been content to exist in the quiet anonymity of civilian life, serving her community through perfect haircuts and flawless color corrections, rather than through the precision skills that had once defined her identity. But today reminded her that service came in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful impact came not from what you could do, but from how you chose to share what you knew with others who needed to learn. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Carmen, Mrs. Peterson called about her appointment tomorrow. Also, that reporter from Channel 7 wants to discuss featuring the salon in their local business spotlight. How was your mysterious morning adventure? Madison smiled, dictating a response through her car's hands-free system. Tell Mrs. Peterson I'll see her at the usual time. The reporter thing sounds interesting. Let's talk when I get back. And the adventure was educational for everyone involved. As she pulled into the alley behind Platinum Edge, Madison could see the familiar bustle of her salon through the large windows. Carmen was expertly managing the mid-morning appointments, her movements confident and efficient as she coordinated between stylists and kept the schedule flowing smoothly. The sight of her professional world continuing exactly as she'd left, it felt both comforting and somehow different than it had just hours earlier. She stored her rifle case in the small office behind the main salon floor, the transition from one identity to another feeling less jarring than it had in years past. Maybe that was the real revelation of the morning. Not that she could still shoot with deadly precision, but that she didn't have to choose between who she had been and who she was becoming. How did it go? Carmen asked as Madison entered. Through the back door, her curiosity evident, but respectful of boundaries. Better than I expected, Madison replied, washing her hands and checking the appointment schedule. I remembered some things I thought I'd forgotten. The afternoon passed in the familiar rhythm of her civilian life. Chung arrived for an emergency. Color touch-up before a board presentation. Trusting Madison to work her usual magic in transforming slightly faded highlights into camera-ready perfection. A young mother brought her twin daughters for their first professional cuts, wanting someone who understood how to make children feel special rather than scared. Each appointment reminded Madison of why she'd chosen this profession. Why the transition from warrior to beautician had felt so unexpectedly natural. Both roles required precision, patience, and the ability to see potential that others might miss. Both involved helping people become the best version of themselves, whether that meant eliminating a threat to protect fellow soldiers or creating a look that would give someone confidence in their daily life. As closing time approached, Madison was surprised to see Marcus Chun entering the salon, looking somewhat out of place among the styling chairs and color processing stations. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers and wore the expression of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about what he wanted to say. "Mr. Chun," Madison said, approaching the front counter with professional courtesy. "What brings you to Platinum Edge?" "I wanted to apologize again for this morning," Marcus said, extending the flowers. "And to make you an offer, if you're interested in hearing it." Madison accepted the bouquet, gesturing for him to take a seat in the consultation area. "What kind of offer?" Marcus glanced around the salon, taking in the photos of satisfied clients, the awards from local business organizations, the comfortable atmosphere that spoke to years of building something meaningful from nothing. "I've been the head of training at Rocky Mountain Precision for 8 years, he said. "In that time I've worked with hundreds of shooters, from complete beginners to national-level competitors. I've never seen instruction as effective as what you provided today." "They were motivated students," Madison replied. "Sometimes that makes all the difference." "It was more than that," Marcus insisted. "You have a gift for teaching, for breaking down complex skills into understandable components. The way you diagnosed and corrected their technique issues, it was like watching a master craftsman at work." Madison waited, sensing there was more to his visit than compliments. "Rocky Mountain wants to offer you a position as a precision marksmanship instructor," Marcus continued. "Part-time, flexible schedule, working with serious shooters who want to take their skills to the next level. The pay would be substantial, and you'd be working with people who genuinely want to learn." The offer hung between them, representing a bridge between the two worlds Madison had thought were permanently separated. She could feel Carmen listening from the back room, along with the few remaining clients who had become inadvertent witnesses to this unexpected job interview. "I'd need to think about it," Madison said finally. "This place," she gestured around the salon, "is my life now. These people depend on me." "Of course," Marcus said quickly. "We wouldn't want to interfere with what you've built here. Maybe weekend workshops or evening sessions for working professionals, something that complements your life rather than competing with it." After Marcus left, Madison stood in her empty salon, surrounded by the tools of her civilian trade, considering the unexpected turn her quiet morning had taken. She'd gone to the range to see if she still possessed the skills that had once defined her. Instead, she discovered that those skills could serve an entirely different purpose now, could teach rather than destroy, could build confidence rather than end lives. Her phone rang, displaying Derek's name. She'd given him her business card before leaving the range, though she hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. "Madison." Derek's voice carried none of the arrogance that had marked their earlier interactions. "I hope I'm not bothering you at work." "Not at all," she replied. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to thank you again for what you did today," Derek said, "but also to ask you something. My daughter is 16, just getting interested in competitive shooting. After what I learned today about assumptions and judging people, I was wondering if you might consider working with her sometime. Not because she's a girl, but because you're the best instructor I've ever encountered." The request touched something deeper than professional pride. Here was a man who had spent the morning dismissing her capabilities based on gender and appearance, now specifically seeking her expertise for his daughter's development. "I'd be honored to work with her," Madison said. "Bring her by the range sometime when I'm there." Over the following weeks, word of the morning's events spread through Colorado's precision shooting community with the kind of mythological quality that develops around truly exceptional demonstrations of skill. The story grew in the telling. Some versions had Madison hitting targets at impossible distances. Others described her as a legendary military sniper whose identity had been classified. Madison found herself fielding calls from ranges across the region, from competitive shooters seeking instruction, from military veterans who had heard rumors and wanted to connect with someone who understood their experience. The bridge between her two worlds had been built, and traffic was flowing in both directions. She began teaching weekend workshops at Rocky Mountain Precision, sharing the fundamental principles that had made her exceptional while carefully avoiding the classified details of her military service. Her students ranged from competitive shooters seeking that extra edge to police officers wanting to improve their long-range capabilities to veterans like herself who were reconnecting with skills they'd thought were permanently retired. What surprised her most was how naturally the teaching role felt, how satisfying it was to watch someone achieve precision they'd never thought possible. Whether she was helping a client achieve the perfect hair color or helping a student achieve consistent accuracy at 800 yards, the core satisfaction remained the same, enabling others to become the best version of themselves. Derek became one of her most dedicated students, bringing not just his daughter, but a new humility to his approach to shooting sports. The transformation in his attitude influenced others at the range, creating a culture more focused on skill development than equipment acquisition, more interested in learning than in demonstrating superiority. 3 months after that transformative morning, Madison stood behind the styling chair at Platinum Edge, putting the finishing touches on a bride's wedding day hair. The young woman glowed with confidence, her reflection showing someone ready to walk down the aisle, knowing she looked absolutely perfect. "Thank you," the bride said, tears threatening to ruin her carefully applied makeup. "I feel beautiful." "You are beautiful," Madison replied. "I just helped you see it." As the bridal party left for their photo session, Madison reflected on how much her life had evolved. She still owned and operated Platinum Edge, still found deep satisfaction in helping people feel confident about their appearance. But now she also spent her weekends at the range, teaching precision and discipline to students who came seeking technical instruction and left with something much more valuable. The phone rang, and Carmen answered with their standard greeting. "Platinum Edge Hair Studio. This is Carmen. How can I help you today?" Madison smiled as she prepared for her next appointment, a regular client who trusted her completely to maintain the look that made him feel powerful in boardroom negotiations. She'd found a way to honor both sides of her experience to serve her community through beauty and precision, creativity and discipline. Everyone has hidden depths, skills and stories that others never see. The quiet person beside you might be a master of something you can't imagine. The unassuming individual in simple clothes might possess capabilities that would astonish you. Madison's story reminds us that we should never judge someone's potential by their appearance, their current profession, or our own limited understanding of who they might be. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from what we say, but from what we demonstrate. Sometimes the greatest service we can provide is showing others that their assumptions about us and about themselves might be completely wrong. She had spent 6 years as a warrior, protecting others through skill and precision. Now she spends her days serving her community through beauty and confidence, and her weekends teaching others to achieve excellence they'd never thought possible. It was a different kind of service, but service nonetheless, and in both roles, she remained exactly who she had always been, someone who refused to be limited by other people's expectations. someone who let her actions speak louder than words, and someone who understood that the greatest victories often came not from proving others wrong, but from helping them discover they could be more than they ever imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.